Hi guys, welcome to the Communicating Self Portfolio video lecture. This is the project that falls between the proposal for your main project and the end white paper, where most of you have a lag because you are either researching, if you're doing a secondary one, or you're working on the actual data and research of the project. So there's a lag as far as what we have to turn in. So we've added in two really helpful projects here. The first one is this Communicating Self Portfolio, which will be helpful for you as you become closer and closer to the real world and want to get a job. So some details. I would like to have, there's at least one misconception here, and that is the word portfolio. When you turn in this portfolio, Communicating Portfolio, I want you to turn in one document. Okay, not 7 different little portfolio files. I want you to work on them individually in files. That'd be fine. But when you turn them in, I want you to copy and paste them all into one single document that you're turning in. Put some blank pages between each section if you wish, or at least have some space there. But one file. Now this will help me, but it'll also help your fellow students who also are going to be working with you in workshops and don't want to open 7 different file folders. All right, so let's pull up here. First document we want to take a look at is this Communicating Self Portfolio document. You'll find this in the document file folders. Here are the contents of what we're talking about. You'll have an overview memo. All right, let's talk about this overview memo. This is a sense of why you did what you did. Okay, give me some details about the job you're applying for. I've asked you to apply to a real job, so an actual position. So I'd like to see some information and probably a link to the job posting that you're actually responding to. I'd like to know about style choices you made. Why did you choose to make certain look, certain feel? It depends on the job that you're applying for, obviously. Whether it's there's some all straight data, or if there's pictures, or if there's font choices. I want to know about that. How did you design it? I'd also like to know about your social media choices. How did you go about dealing with LinkedIn or personal web pages or whatever? So that's your memo. Okay, so that's the first thing you'll have in it. You'll also have an elevator speech. Now that is essentially a 30-second introduction of who you are. Okay. The idea is that it would be something that you might say to somebody at a cocktail lounge or at a conference or standing next to someone in an elevator. In 30 seconds, has to be quick and fast. The idea is to sound confident, to sound like you know what you're doing, but not to sound memorized. It's kind of tricky. So you have to plan the wording really well, and you have to do a lot of practicing so it sounds like you're who you are, you represent yourself well or your product well, but it doesn't sound like you're a robot. So you are going to there's going to be actually 2 of those. The first one's going to be recorded in an audio version. There's a separate lecture that we'll talk about, so make sure that you read that. As far as the portfolio, you're going to have both of them submitted in written or transcript form. So I'll have the transcript of each of these within this portfolio. Okay. If you're doing secondary research, English majors and some other ones, make sure that you are talking about the product itself, which is the research you're doing. It's going to take some time to get this right and to do some practicing, so don't just do that spur of the last minute. Okay, so those are your elevator speeches. Cover letter. I want to talk about the cover letter. Let's scroll down here. The cover letter there's a lot of misconceptions with the cover letter. A lot of people think that the cover letter is just some sort of piece of paper that goes along with your resume, and that it's not nearly as important as your resume, and sometimes jobs don't even ask for them. This is a big error, or can be a big error. The cover letter is really important because it gives them an opportunity to see what you are like, gives them your personality. Especially in the engineering field, your resumes look fairly close to the same, right? They're fairly cut and dry. They don't really give an opportunity for them to get a feel for who you are. So the cover letter can give them an opportunity to hear about a little bit of your personality, but also some of those other things that you might add to it. Remember your MAPS, M-A-P-S, mode, audience, purpose, situation. We want to think about the mode of the resume in the cover letter. Who is your audience? That's very important for you to consider. Who am I writing this cover letter to? Well, what do they want from me? Remember that the purpose of a cover letter is to get them to read your resume. The purpose of a resume is to get you the job interview. Keep those things lined up in your mind and what their purpose is. Talk to them about perhaps some additional information that they may not know, a job, co-op, a hobby that is relevant, something that gives them a little bit of a feel for who you are. What do you not do in a cover letter? Do not simply repeat your resume, okay? If you're going to do that, then there's no point in having a cover letter. The cover letter and the resume are completely different documents. They do different things. Take advantage of the opportunity to talk about your co-ops or your internships, or something that is a story perhaps that talks about what you learned or what you did. Do not waste those 3 to 4 paragraphs in that cover letter by repeating the same thing. It'll probably just get tossed in the trash can if you do that. Right, what do you do in a cover letter? Address this to a real person. I can't stress that enough. Do some research and find out who this document is going to. How many of you like to get letters in the mailbox that are addressed to Dear Resident or Dear Occupant? Most of those don't get opened. They get tossed in the trash. Do a little research. If you can't find something, if you've done a little work and you still aren't able to find something, then it's okay to say Dear Hiring Professional, Dear Hiring Manager, but use that as a last resort. If you can, in that cover letter, talk about how you heard about the job. What website did you find it on? What date did you find it on? What connections are between the job and you? Include the name of Purdue Fort Wayne, because that does carry some weight. And again, finish that cover letter very strongly by requesting an interview and thanking them. Okay, so this is what you might find in a resume. Well, resumes, you've probably all done one at some point in the past. Very important to keep them as crisp and efficient and well designed as absolutely possible. Don't lie in your resume. You'd be surprised at how often people lie in their resume and then they get the job and it's under false pretenses. You're going to be fired. Don't do that. We're looking for resumes, of course. Primarily, the first thing that I'm going to want to see, and again, how much time does a resume get? Seconds, 5 seconds maybe. If you pass the 5-second mark, you've done something right and they're looking at it again. So if it doesn't look good in the top 5 seconds while I'm reading from the top upper left to the bottom right, then the look doesn't please me in some way. There's too much fonts, there's too much wording, there's not enough, whatever the case may be, and it gets tossed in the trash can because I see some errors in grammar or logic or whatever. You really only have 5 seconds to begin with. You're competing against a lot of people. So let's get this resume correct. So include your personal information, your contact information right at the top. If you have a website, if you have a LinkedIn profile, if you have a mailing address, your phone number, your email, all of that stuff should be right at the top. On the emails, make sure it's a professional email. Or a generic professional email. So that would be something that, at gmail.com. Don't have anything that's unprofessional, like sexylegs1066@gmail.com. It does matter. Use your IPFW email or come up with something that is at least generic for you to get information from. The second thing is obviously your relevant information. Let's see here. Let me pull up a student sample here. You can find this one also in this is the Ben Owens. Let's take a look at one. There's a cover letter here. This is his entire portfolio, so you can take a look at it. Here is his resume. Notice that it's very efficient, very quick, good use of white space, good use of headings. There's not a whole lot of different fonts to distract us from what he's trying to say. There's good headings that talk about, if I'm looking for, hey, what's the qualifications? What's this guy's experience? What's his education? I can look that up fairly quickly. That's the whole object, again, is to be able to make it skimmable. Very, very important to make it skimmable. If you haven't graduated yet, which most of you haven't, I'm assuming, then make sure you put in your anticipated graduation date. They want to know that. Don't bother to put in your GPA unless it's something noteworthy. Just leave it blank. Ignore it. If Oh, I've noticed this thing up here. Now notice Ben has a career summary. You'll see that a lot. That's a good way to do things. You might also see an objective. If you see an objective, that is not a requirement. It's a stylistic choice. You will use it wisely. Make sure it says something. If you say something fairly vague, you know, like my object is to obtain a position where my skills are utilized, you haven't told them anything. In fact, you've probably told them that they're wasting your time with you. So make sure that information, every word counts in this resume. You don't have much of them. You agonize over every single word, every single sentence to make sure, is it necessary? Does it tell them something? Remember that you're not telling them what you want to know. You're telling them what they want to know. So again, keep those maps in mind. Who's your audience and what do they want? That's what you want to put down there. All right, so if your resume has too much white space, that indicates that you don't have enough experience. If it has too much verbiage, that means that you might be someone who talks a lot and isn't concise. So it represents you fairly well. Let's keep that. You want to keep your resume to 1 page if possible, at the very most 2 if you have a lot of experience you want to list. Probably 1 page is going to be what you're aiming for here. You don't want it to be a puffy thing. But if you do have that job experience, make sure you include it there. Anything more than a 2-pager is what we call a curriculum vitae, and that's an academic one. You don't want to go there because that's not what you're aiming for. You're aiming for something completely different. So here's what Ben has, and I recommend that you take a look at it and see what he's included. Yours will be different. Yours will not be the same because each one of you has a completely different major, and you're applying for a different job. The resumes and the cover letter should be tailored for the job that you are applying for. Okay, so every resume should be changed slightly if that's necessary to what you're looking for. Okay, so what do I want to see in a resume? What does anybody want to see in a resume? I want to make it skimmable. I want to see these bullet points here. Make sure that the bullet points are parallel structure. Notice they all start and end the same. Performed, composed, managed, performed, mentored. Make sure that they're parallel structure. They don't have to be in complete sentences, so there doesn't have to be punctuation. They're bullet points. Make them quick and concise. I want to see a nice balance of words and spaces, as I've said. I want to see some variation between bolded and not bolded, but I don't want to see too much variation because that makes it hard to skim. Notice these all caps are much harder to read than not all caps, so use them sparingly. Also, words in italics are also harder to skim, so use them very sparingly, only for emphasis. Okay, so not too many shapes, sizes, or colors, or pictures, but just the right amount so that it looks good and is visible and it represents you. So that's all for now. There are 3 different things for you to take a look at. There's the Communicating Self portfolio, which kind of goes through all these information I've just talked about. Tells you a little bit more detail. There's the elevator speech, which again there'll be another lecture on that one, and the one that I've talked about the most here, which is Ben Owen's student sample. So have a good week, stay warm, see you later.